your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff. Welcome to the Peter Schiff Show on this Friday, Jobs Friday, Open Forum Friday. No guests. Taking your calls for the next 2 hours. 855-4-SCHIFF. Also, this evening marks the beginning of the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur. So certainly want to wish everybody who's celebrating that holiday this evening a good one and an easy fast for those of you who will be fasting on later this evening and for the Yom Kippur day on Saturday. Anyway, here in the U.S., we've got the jobs numbers that came out this morning. Actually, the numbers were a little bit better than economists had forecast. They were looking for about 60,000 jobs created during the month of September. And instead, we created 103,000 jobs during the month, although I think 45,000 of those jobs were the result of Verizon workers who had been on strike coming back to work. So it's kind of hard to say that those jobs were actually created. So if you net out those 45,000 Verizon workers, you get an increase of 58,000, which is about what they were estimating, although I don't know if the estimates included the 45,000 Verizon workers or not. But clearly that's where, the biggest chunk of jobs came from. They actually went back and revised upward last month's numbers, which was initially was a zero. So they revised that up. I think I'm trying to figure out what that was. It wasn't a big number, but it was maybe 30 or 40,000. I can't find the exact number. So last month wasn't as bad as had been originally reported. Of course, if you look beneath the numbers, the economy lost manufacturing jobs yet again, the second month in a row. We have lost manufacturing jobs, and those are the kind of jobs that we need to create. We need to create more producers, not just more consumers. When people get a job, they want to buy things with their paychecks, but if we make fewer things, we end up spending those paychecks on imports, and we run up the trade deficit. We need jobs that will reduce the trade deficit, not make it worse. So it's problematic that we are still losing jobs. On the unemployment front, we didn't create enough jobs to reduce the rate of unemployment. That came in unchanged at 9.1%. But if you look at the more comprehensive U6 number, which, of course, is the number that we should be using because it's the number that counts the disgruntled workers, it counts the people who are working part-time but who are still full-time looking for full-time jobs, that number actually inched upward to 16.5%. So that is the real rate of unemployment for the U.S. economy is 16.5%. And so when people want to compare the unemployment rate today to the Great Depression, and they say, well, Great Depression, we had up to 20% or more, and we've only got 9% now, that is not comparing apples to apples. What you want to do, if you want to compare our unemployment rate to what we had during the Great Depression, you need to use the 16.5 because that is much closer to the methodology that was actually used during the Great Depression when we had an unemployment rate of upward of 20%. Of course, that represented the peak. If you look at how long the unemployment rate has been above 16% in the U.S., how many years, I haven't actually checked this. Maybe it's something that I should check into or somebody else could check it online. But I would be willing to bet that we have had more years of unemployment above 16%, or let's say 15%, maybe it might have got to 15.9. We probably have had more years with unemployment above 15% than they did during the Great Depression. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just speculating that might be the case. So maybe I'll be able to check it during the break, or if somebody wants to go on Google while I'm doing the show and look at on the each year. Because when you're looking at the unemployment rates from the Great Depression, you're basically looking at U6. You're not looking at the numbers we report today because they did count disgruntled people as being unemployed. We don't count them today, but they did count them back then. So, well, because it might already be worse than the Great Depression when it comes to unemployment. So those who claim that, no, it's not the case, that things were so much worse back then, maybe they are mistaken. Speaking about the Great Depression, I watched Alan Greenspan, who was interviewed on CNBC early this morning. And, first of all, why they, show any real reverence to Alan Greenspan at all at this point is beyond me. I mean, the guy pretty much almost single-handedly destroyed the economy. I mean, to have him weigh in on his opinion on, what we should do about the housing problem. He was the architect of the housing bubble. It was pretty much his creation. Back then I said that if there was a deck of playing cards, with all the people responsible for the housing bubble and the financial crisis, Alan Greenspan would be the ace of spades. In fact, he might be all the aces in the deck. That's how much blame can be laid at Alan Greenspan. Now, clearly he wasn't the only individual, but of all the individuals who are culpable in both the housing bubble and its ultimate bursting and the financial crisis, Alan Greenspan bears far more responsibility than any other single individual. Yet, he comes on these shows and everybody shows respect for the guy like he's still the maestro. They forget that the orchestra, the music that he made, was a disaster. I mean, it was terrible. Yet they still, want to, treat him with kid gloves and with. It's almost like they're starstruck when he sits down and watching these guys talk to Alan Greenspan. But one of the things that Alan Greenspan said is that he wishes we had actually done, and it shows you, how ridiculous this guy is. He is upset that we didn't follow his advice a couple of years ago as to how to handle the housing crisis. And what was Alan Greenspan's advice? Well, he said the government should have bought up all the excess houses and then burned them to the ground. That's his idea. Destroy the houses that we spent resources building. Now, that is about the stupidest thing that we could do. One of the only things that we've got to show for the housing bubble is that we have more houses. I mean, these houses have value. They have utility. People can live there. Yes, we built too many houses. It would have been better had we used those resources to do something else. But since we already used those resources to build houses, we've got the houses. Why destroy them? That would mean that all of that effort produced zero value instead of at least some value. Yes, it would have been better had we done something else than building houses. But since the houses are already there, it makes no sense to destroy them just so we can prop up the price of the houses that we don't destroy. That is complete nonsense. And it really shows a total lack of understanding of basic economics on the part of Alan Greenspan. And I'm going to continue on this line when we get back. So stick around. We got a lot of people on hold. I will get to your calls. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and we're talking about Alan Greenspan's stupid idea that he's actually claiming credit for how brilliant he was to come up with this, where the government should have purchased all of the excess real estate and then destroyed it, burned it to the ground so that real estate prices would be higher than they otherwise would have been. Of course, he's claiming as a model for this program the Great Depression program of the Roosevelt administration to destroy livestock to drive the price of food up. Now, think about all the stupid things that the U.S. government has done. That's probably the stupidest. Can you imagine that you have this Great Depression? People are waiting in soup lines. You've got all this unemployment. People are out of work. And the one bright spot, maybe, is that prices for things like food are really coming down, that it's a lot less expensive for people to eat. which was a real good thing during the Depression because, hell, think about how much worse the Depression would have been if food was getting a lot more expensive instead of cheaper, lightening the burden. And what was the government's idea? What was their solution? We need to destroy food. We need to destroy fields and livestock so that food will be more expensive. I mean, what a stupid thing to do. Yeah, they were trying to help the farmers, but they were gonna hurt everybody else in the process. I don't even think those 7-year-olds, those second graders, could have come up with something that stupid. But anyway, that's what Alan Greenspan was holding up as his model that we should replicate during this crisis that he created, except this time we should destroy houses. Kind of like, we tried that with automobiles. That's what Cash for Clunkers was all about, right? The government bought cars and destroyed them. What was the result? Well, we had fewer used cars, and so used car prices went up, and the country is poorer because we destroyed vehicles that worked in order to borrow additional money to import new vehicles. But think about what Alan Greenspan is saying. First of all, how much would it cost for the government to buy up all the excess real estate? And, of course, there would be a lot more excess real estate than the government believes, because the minute the government started buying property, a lot of property that's not now on the market would have been sold to the government. There are a lot of houses that aren't for sale because the owners know that they can't sell them. But if the government was willing to buy houses at above their market prices to destroy them, how many more people would have opted to sell their house to the government? A lot of people. That's the moral hazard of a government program. So the minute the government says we're going to buy the excess houses and destroy them, all of a sudden there's a lot of more excess houses than you knew. How many trillions of dollars would it cost to buy up all these houses? And where would the money come from? I mean, they going to dramatically run up the deficit in order to do that? Are they just going to print a bunch of money? And what are the adverse consequences to the economy of doing all that? Meanwhile, the cost of destroying these houses, it's not just, you just can't throw a match and let them burn. I mean, you have to have a controlled demolition. And then what do you do with the debris? You just can't leave piles of wood in the middle of residential neighborhoods. I mean, that's a health hazard. That's a safety hazard. Those are eyesores. So the government is going to have to clear away all the debris. What would that cost? Then what are they going to do with the land, the vacant property? I mean, are they going to put that on the market and try to sell the lots? I mean, wouldn't that defeat the whole purpose? Wouldn't all these vacant real estate up for sale? Wouldn't that depress the market? So the government would have to hold on to the land. And I guess they'd have to pay property taxes. So now the U.S. government would be paying all its property taxes year after year after year. Obviously, the taxes wouldn't be that high because there wouldn't be a property there. There'd just be vacant land. But, of course, now, what are all these states going to do and municipalities, right? They're obviously not getting nearly as much property tax as they were when there was actually a built house there. And, of course, are they going to maintain? Are they going to have to send someone there to mow the lawn? I mean, because obviously the neighbors are going to complain if the government is just allowing all these weeds to grow on their property. So now the government's going to have to hire people to attend these vacant lots and mow the lawn and, I don't know, do whatever they have to do to maintain. How much would all this cost? And, of course, is society really better off if we demolish all the housing stock? Is that going to create jobs for people? And all the added costs associated with destroying all these houses are going to weaken the economy. What about rents? Rents would be a lot higher than they otherwise would be. A lot of those houses are probably now up for rent. Wouldn't the economy be struggling even more if rent prices were rising as fast as food prices or energy prices or college tuition or health care? Do we really want to add higher rents to the struggling American economy? And, would it stop? Would all of a sudden there be no more foreclosures? No. If people bought houses that they can't afford, even the ones that didn't sell them to the government, you're still going to have foreclosures in the future. So what is the government going to do? Are we going to have a program where whenever we're going to buy up every house that the banks foreclose on? I mean, the whole thing is complete asinine, yet he can say it with a straight face, and people still have respect for him. I mean, think about this. This is the last thing I'll say on this subject, then I'm going to take some calls. What would happen if some, alien race came down to Earth and, not to start a war, that's what Paul Krugman wants, to really give the economy a boost, but they came down in peace. And as an offering of goodwill, let's say this alien civilization had the technology to manipulate matter and energy at its will. And so what they did is they went to all of the wooded areas of our country, all the deserts, all the empty spaces where there's nothing there right now. And they just, shine this big laser beam down there. And all of a sudden, we had enough McMansions for everybody in the country. All of a sudden, communities just popped up out of the desert, with, these McMansions with all the modern amenities, fully furnished, plasma TVs on the walls, swimming pools, all the granite countertops, everything that you want. And then there was schools there, all the infrastructure. The streets were there, schools, office buildings, fire department. I mean, just ready to go. Turnkey cities, just created out of nothing with enough housing for everybody. Right? Now, what would that do to the value of the homes that already exist? Well, I mean, they would crash, right? I mean, who would want an old beat-up house when you could just walk for free and just occupy a brand-new McMansion? So housing prices would collapse if some alien civilization were to bestow this gift upon us. Now, would we be worse off? Well, guys, Alan Greenspan would, according to him, he would consider this an act of, interplanetary war. Oh, my God, how dare you destroy our economy like that? Giving us all this stuff for free, it's going to destroy the value of the houses that we already have. I mean, obviously, this is nonsense. We want to have more stuff. We want to have a higher standard of living. We want more housing. We want better housing. The problem was we want to maximize the use of our resources. We used resources that should have been used to build factories or to maintain our infrastructure. Instead, we used it to overbuild housing. The fact that we have these houses now, we're better off than having just used that money on nothing. I mean, what if we simply took all the money that went into building the housing bubble and we had just spent it, going on a manned mission to some other planet? And we had blown it on that, or just, did something in where we had no benefit whatsoever. We dug giant holes in the earth and then filled them back up again. I mean, something completely, we sent everybody out into space, so we can count the rocks on the moon, or I don't know. I mean, obviously we would be worse off if we did that. The one thing we've got to show for the monumental mistakes that was made as a result of Alan Greenspan and his crazy monetary policy is we got some houses out of the deal. I mean, we would have been better if we had factories, but having houses is better than having nothing to show for it. And if we had simply destroyed all those houses that we spent scarce resources to build, that's what we'd have to show for all of the efforts. Absolutely nothing. And then we would have all this debt. See, all the mortgage debt doesn't go away. We would have all the debt of the housing bubble, but none of the houses. How stupid is that? How much worse shape would our economy be if we had followed Alan Greenspan's advice? Anyway, we will be back. I'm going to be taking your calls, I promise. This is Peter Schiff here on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Radio. The Peter Schiff Show.
And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Hey, just a quick programming note. At the break coming up between the 2 hours of the program, I will be doing a live hit on Fox Business. So if you are near a television set, you might want to tune in. You'll be able to hear that interview, which will happen between the first and second hours during the break. Anyway, let me go and grab some of the phone calls. First up is going to be Robbie calling all the way from Australia. Robbie, good evening.
Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Good.
Good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I had a question for you. A couple of months ago, there was this politician that was on a question and answer show here in Australia, and he referred to a quote or a theory of what he called the great economist John Maynard Keynes. And what he talked about was the paradox of thrift. And he basically went on to explain that according to the paradox of thrift, if nobody spends money and everyone saves their money, then, businesses will suffer and, people won't have jobs and so on and so forth. And,
there is the reality is there is no paradox of thrift. I mean, it's all an illusion, created in the mind of Keynes himself. But in reality, thrift is good, so there is no paradox. But what he is trying to say is that economies grow as a result of spending, and that we're told that savings is a good thing. Yet if everybody saves, it's a bad thing because if you save, you can't spend. And therefore the economy will weaken. But what Keynes fails to comprehend is what happens with money that is saved. It is not buried in the ground. When people save money, they look to get a return on it. They want to grow their savings by loaning it out or by investing it. So the question is, what do the people who borrow that savings do with it? They invest it in growing the economy, in improving our capital stock, in hiring people, in producing things. And, of course, why are people saving money? They're saving money so that they can consume things in the future. I mean, that's the only reason people are saving. I mean, everybody wants to spend. Everybody wants to buy. It's just that people who are saving are expressing a preference that I want to spend in the future too. I just don't want to have money to spend today. I want to buy things in the future. And in fact, I want to buy more things in the future because I want to get a return on my money. And so people are simply setting aside the date of their consumption to a future point in time. And so it's not stopping consumption. It's actually facilitating consumption because more savings today equals more consumption in the future. If we all just spent everything that we earned, then there'd be very little future consumption because there would be no investment able to finance the production of goods that could ultimately be consumed. So it is only in the minds of somebody who thinks so simplistically, who doesn't connect any of the dots. It is something that maybe a 7-year-old would think of that doesn't actually understand some things in a more complex manner. Just says, if people aren't spending, well then retail sales are falling, and so people might lose their jobs or something like that. It's people who see things through such a narrow a vision.
Yeah, well, I knew it was a fallacy. I just wanted to get how you would explain the fallacy in that logic.
Yeah, and some people say that, well, it's good if one person saves. On a micro level, if an individual family saves, that's a good thing. But if we all do it, it's a bad thing. And that's nonsense. If it's good for one person to do it, it's good for everybody to do it. You can't say we want if one person saves, it's good, but if a lot of people saves, it's bad. If it's good for one, it's good for all. It makes sense for a family. It makes sense for a nation. It isn't a paradox at all. The only paradox is that people can be foolish enough to believe in it. Maybe there's a paradox of intelligence.
Yeah. I've got one more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a policy that's floating around with one of the parties here in Australia to tax small business at a lower rate. The company tax rate is 30%, and they're proposing to tax small business at 25%. And they haven't really released any details of what would comprise a small business, but I actually asked a question on one of their discussion forums, asked a few questions about it, and I got censored for asking. But what I was asking was, how many employees equals a small business, and how are you going to stop people from, outsourcing work so that they remain under...
Well, you put your nail on the head. There's a moral hazard there. The minute you say we're going to tax small businesses at a lower rate than large businesses, there's an incentive to keep your business small, to prevent your business from growing so that you can have a small business. And, of course, there's an incentive for people to have multiple businesses. Instead of having one company, I break my company up into several smaller companies to reduce my taxes. And so the net effect is maybe economies of scale that existed now don't exist because the government has thrown the tax code in there. And so now I'm making decisions that may not be the best use of resources, but they are given the tax consideration. So what they should do, obviously, is, small businesses probably have lower profits. So the best way to do that would just be, to graduate the income tax and say, okay, if you make $1 million, here's your tax rate. If you make $2 million, here's your tax rate. So at least, you're not encouraging all that accounting gimmickry. But, of course, I would just be in favor of a flat rate tax and lower it for everybody. And, don't try to discourage companies from getting bigger by punishing them with higher taxes. We want to preserve all the incentives for companies to grow and get bigger, and not try to create reasons for companies not to grow and remain small.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I brought up too, which on the forum, was what about the company that is just over the threshold of being a small business? How are you going to stop them from downsizing or laying off one worker just to get a 5% tax break?
Yeah, I mean, how do you define a small business? Is it based on the number of employees? Is it based on their revenue? Is it based on their profitability? I mean, there could be different ways that you could do it. But however they define it, the moral hazard is business owners will try to reshape their businesses in order to qualify for the lower tax break. I mean, that happens in everything. I mean, just like people's behaviors are influenced by unemployment benefits. People, will stay unemployed until their unemployment benefits run out. I mean, that's, people, taxes shape behavior, whatever it is, whatever you tax, you're going to discourage, whatever you subsidize, you're going to encourage. And, that is the moral hazard that our legislators seem oblivious to. No matter how much proof that it exists, they still don't want to acknowledge it. But, hey, thanks for your call. Appreciate your listening down under. Next caller, a little bit closer to home in New York. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello. Yes, I am much closer to you than down under. I was calling. I have a specific question, but I did want to say that I am a regular viewer of Bloomberg, and I did write to them, I don't know, a couple months ago asking them why they don't have you on, which I didn't realize that you had once been on there a lot. And I was watching them again this morning, and I just was wondering if maybe they're catering to people who advertise with them, which are more of the big traditional firms.
I don't know, but I mean, I never advertised with them when I was on all the time. And you go to my website, Europac.net, and look at the video archives under multimedia, and go back to 06, 07, 08, and look at those Bloomberg interviews. I mean, I was on all the time, and I wasn't just on for a small segment. They would have me on for an entire hour on many, many occasions, and I had a lot of very good one-on-one interviews, not these little sound clips. I mean, my best stuff was all on Bloomberg as far as all the forecasting and great interviews. I always had good feedback. They always wanted to have me on. They would call me on. I did some Bloomberg shows in Asia. I did a lot of stuff with Bloomberg. See, the problem is Bloomberg didn't have as big an audience as, let's say, a CNBC or a Fox, because it was more industry-specific. But I know that there are a lot of people that enjoyed watching me on Bloomberg, because I would get emails from people after I was on Bloomberg from people in the industry. Hey, great segment. I write on. So I know that people enjoyed seeing me. But, yeah, it's almost been 3 years, and it's not like we don't try to get on. We send emails to the Bloomberg bookers all the time with my commentary, my reaction to different things, story ideas, segment ideas, and they've rejected everything. And then, what they told my brother yesterday, they said, well, we just haven't seen any segments in the last few years that we thought Peter would be right for. You go. But it's not just that, look, some certain shows, like on CNBC, Squawk Box, those are the guys that gave me the name Dr. Doom. I used to be on Squawk Box probably more than any of the other CNBC shows. They haven't had me on in years. They won't have me on. They refuse to book me. They book plenty of people who got it completely wrong, leading up to the financial crisis, people that were 100% wrong. Like I just saw, Diane Swank on there again today. I mean, she was I had a debate with Diane Swank where she was trying to tell me how great the automobile industry was just before, how productive and efficient GM and Chrysler were, and how they were like a model of efficiency and capitalism, and they were these great, well-run businesses, like, a year before they were bailed out by the government. I mean, and, there are people on there that have been so completely wrong on the economy, yet for some reason, they never outweigh their welcome. But I don't know. Look, I'm on some parts. Look, I'm on Fast Money. But, of course, I was never on Fast Money before the crisis. There are some shows on CNBC that'll book me and some shows that refuse to book me. But they used to book me all the time. And so, I don't know what the agenda is. I mean, somebody could postulate that, well, I'm too free market oriented for Bloomberg. I mean, I'm too much of a radical Republican libertarian kind of guy, and maybe Bloomberg that owns it is doesn't want to give me a platform. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But what I don't believe for a second is that there's no segments that were right for me, because if anything, the segments are more right for me now than they were in the past. In the past, I was predicting all this crazy economic collapse and Armageddon and the worst recession since the Great Depression, double-digit unemployment, housing prices collapsing, bailouts, $1 trillion deficits. I was predicting all this stuff that people thought would never happen, yet they let me come on their air and say it. Now that all this stuff has happened, and now that my forecasting, I'm more mainstream now than I was before since the stream has shifted. Why I'm not on? You got me. But anyway, hey, don't go away. I don't know if you have a follow-up question. You can hold on. We will be right back. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. I don't know what it is with our politicians and elementary school kids. I don't know. Maybe the president feels that they can relate to elementary school kids better. Maybe they're on the same level, or maybe they figure they have a better chance of selling their message to the youngsters. But anyway, I've got some sound from Vice President Biden, who went down to an elementary school to speak with a group of fifth graders. Now, maybe Obama sent him down there looking for some economic advice. Maybe they're finished, using the advice of the second graders, and it's not working, so they're figuring, hey, maybe if we can tap the intellectual firepower of a fifth grade class, maybe we could really come up with a way to solve this economic problem. But the interesting thing is Biden is there to try to convince these kids that the problems that we're experiencing are not their fault. This is the common refrain. Hey, it's not our fault. Everything is bad because of what happened before we got here. So don't blame me. And I don't know, the country's not buying it, but maybe Biden thinks he can sell it to the fifth graders. If they don't buy it, hey, maybe he can try the second graders again. But anyway, here, play this cut number 9.
Talk about show and tell. These fifth grade students at Oakstead Elementary had a front row seat today for history as the vice president of the nation came to their classroom to talk about the economy and jobs.
A lot of really good people are having trouble finding work, and a lot of good people, grown-ups, are having trouble paying to stay in their house.
The vice president, who has grandchildren of his own, sat down with the students to explain his position on the economy on their level.
Because things got really bad before we came into office, an awful lot of companies said, well, there's no more jobs for you here.
Yep, because things got really bad before I got here. I think one mistake of the reporter is I don't think he's coming down to their level. Maybe he had to up his game a little bit to come up to the level of a fifth grader, because maybe some of these fifth graders probably know a lot more about economics than the president. So he had to kind of brush up a little bit to try to communicate at a fifth grade level, because that's probably beyond his general capacity. Anyway, so let me go back to the phones. Next up is Brian calling from Hoboken, New Jersey. Brian, you're on. Whoa, did we lose Brian? Probably. Let's go to John calling, also from New Jersey, but this is Jersey City. John, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Peter. I had a quick question. I want to know, why are most of the countries, not only in Europe, but, America, and why are they all bankrupt? Is it they're all greedy and retarded, or do they know they can just borrow more and keep printing their way out of it? And also, how are the banks able to loan so much money? Isn't there a limit to their lending? How much they can lend?
All the countries aren't bankrupt. Because some of the countries are loaning the money to the countries that are bankrupted. But, yeah, a lot of countries are broke. And it's basically the flaw of democracy and central banking, which are a very lethal combination, because politicians want to get elected promising something for nothing. They want to promise all sorts of goodies, but they don't want to tax people to pay for them. So the way that they do that is by going into debt. And central banks make it a lot easier for governments to go into debt by buying the debt directly, by keeping rates artificially low, by guaranteeing the debts so that governments can borrow a lot more money than would otherwise be the case if lenders were worried about how indebted these countries were and their ability to repay. So because politicians want to get reelected, and because central bankers help them, and because we don't have the discipline of a gold standard keeping a lid on extravagancy, we get more and more debts. And the politicians that vote for more debts keep getting elected, because in the short run, the borrowed money is spent to buy votes, and the people who get the borrowed money are happy about it, and they vote to return to office the politicians who gave it to them, and politicians who promise more. And if a politician comes and says, we can't do this anymore, this is extravagant, this is going to lead to disaster, they don't win. They're dismissed as a gloom and doomer, party pooper, heartless, or they'll use crazy Keynesian economics to actually justify the debt and the spending as if it's actually a good thing. And you'll get, guys like I played the clip yesterday from that former Reagan advisor, although I can't imagine Reagan actually took any of his advice, although maybe he's changed his tunes, who said he thinks what we should do now is borrow like crazy. Yes, that is the solution. Borrow like crazy, and that is how we're going to help our economy. You borrow and spend. That is what got us into the mess. So, yeah, I mean, it is not a coincidence that you have a lot of these democratic countries that have, big voting blocks that are broke. And, one of the reasons that so many European countries are so broke now is because when they joined the Eurozone, the false perception and moral hazard was that they wouldn't fail, that now they were part of the Eurozone, and instead of borrowing in drachma, all of a sudden the Greek government was borrowing in euros. And so people were far more willing to loan Greece euros than they used to be to loan them drachma. After all, if you loan drachma, you're going to get paid back in drachma, and the Greek central bank did not have a history of preserving the value of the drachma. But the ECB had a good history with the Deutschmark. People perceived that the euro was simply the new Deutschmark. And so when countries like Greece were able to borrow in euros with the perception of some kind of implied guarantee, or, hey, the Eurozone won't let one of their member nations fail, Greece was able to borrow a lot more money than would otherwise have been the case. And so the politicians took advantage of that ability to borrow to buy a bunch of votes and get elected, which is what America is doing, right? What does everybody say now? We should take advantage of all the cheap money, all the low interest rates, to borrow even more money and spend it, right? But all of that is very short-sighted. That is good for politicians who want to get reelected, because the people who get that check in whatever form it becomes are happy they got it, and they want to reward the politician who gave it to them. They don't want to reward the politician that said you can't have it. Just like little kids, I mean, yeah, they're happy when somebody says, yeah, you can have ice cream and cake, and you can have toys, and you can skip school today, and gives them everything they want. Yeah, but is that good for them? Is that good for their health? Is that good for their future? Of course not. But hey, that's what elections are all about, and so it's not an accident. And of course, there are so many quotes from our founding fathers. It's amazing we don't listen to them about how violent democracies are in their deaths and how long democracies will last. Only as long as until the public figures they can vote themselves benefits from the public purse, and they end up being bankrupt. And we're seeing that now, real time. Anyway, hey, don't go away. We've got another full hour coming up here on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
It's a brand new day.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And this is Peter Schiff. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is underway. We're taking calls 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. Well, looking at the markets, it has been a pretty quiet day. We've had a lot of volatility recently, and here we have this big jobs number, which is, usually the most watched of all the economic numbers. And here we're having a day of relative calm in the markets compared to what we've been used to of late. The Dow is up about 35 points right now, and I don't think we've even been up or down 100 at any point during the day. So we've actually had less volatility on a day that you might have expected more volatility. There's a lot of action in the bond market, though, last couple of days. The yield on the 10-year is all the way back up to the nosebleed level of 2.1%. Now, of course, 2.1% is still exceptionally low, but we got to 1.7% just about 4 days ago. So that's a pretty big move in a relative short period of time. On the 30-year, we're back above 3%. We're at 3.05. We were down at 2.7 there. But I'd say, the downtrend is still intact in yields and the uptrend in bond prices. So I don't think that we've seen any indication that would say, hey, maybe this bond bubble has burst just yet. I mean, I'm sure it's a bubble, and it will burst. But I don't know that we can make that call right now, at least in the short run. Yes, we have had a move, but it seems to me right now that so far it's just a move back to the trend line and that the overall trend is still intact. On the dollar front, dollar is weaker today, as you would expect. Stocks up, dollar down, which, again, shows you how ridiculous this is. We get news that is interpreted as being positive for the U.S. economy, meaning that we created more jobs than people thought. So it's positive for the U.S. economy, but that means the U.S. dollar goes down. Now, if things were normal, you go back a few years ago, the dollar generally responded to what was perceived to be good economic news by rising. It was bad economic news that hurt the dollar. So the dollar and stocks used to be positively correlated. Now they're negatively correlated. And the question is, what has changed? And I think, it's how the markets are trading. They're trading over inflation. They're trading over fear. And so when people are confident, they don't want dollars. It's only when they feel that the world is going to the hell in a handbasket that for some reason they want dollars. They just haven't realized that the handbasket we're going to hell in is made of dollars. But one of these days they will figure that out. But realize that the only reason that people are buying dollars is because they're afraid. And they're expressing their fear in a very irrational way. But the minute there's any good news, the bottom falls out of the dollar. So that should undercut the willingness of anybody to want to invest in the U.S. Because if you believe that stocks are a good place to go, why would you want to own U.S. stocks? Because if the U.S. stock market goes up, so are all the other stock markets. I mean, they're all going in the same direction. And, of course, if the U.S. stock market goes up, the dollar is going to go down. So almost by definition, if you think the markets are going to go up, you're going to make more money investing abroad because you'll get the stocks going up and you'll get the currency in which they're denominated going up. See, when you're in the U.S., you're kind of swimming against the stream. Yes, you make money because the stocks go up in value, but then you lose purchasing power as the dollars that the stocks are denominated in go down in value. And, of course, the real purchasing power of your dividends is eroded as well. So this should show people that this is not real. I mean, if we really had a real recovery, a strong economic data should be good for the dollar. The fact that it's bad for the dollar really should show you that something real is going on here. Something has changed, and it's not a good thing. Anyway, let me go back to the telephones. Who do we got? Next up is Brian, back on the line from Hoboken, New Jersey. Brian, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Peter. First off, I just want to say I've been following you for years, and you've taught me so much, and I thank you so much. And I'm proud to say I'm now a happy client of Euro Pacific Precious Metals.
Okay, well, you're welcome, and thanks for your business.
All right, and here's my question for you. A lot of times, when you and others do these debates on big government policies and tax policies, you tend to argue from the point of, how these policies are bad for the economy, they're inefficient policies for our economy, and that's all valid and everything. But what do you think about taking an approach more from a moral or philosophical standpoint and trying to, strike a deeper chord, with people by saying, it's right versus wrong. It's morality. It's property rights. It's wrong to tax because you're stealing wealth and property from a human that earned it. I mean, do you see that approach as being, effective as well in arguing these policies?
Yeah, I mean, I argue that philosophy that the taxation is tantamount to theft if it's done the way we're doing it. I mean, if people are taxed for the common benefit of everybody, that's one thing. But when one person is taxed specifically to the benefit of another, that's no different than theft. And just because, if I'm not allowed to steal money from somebody directly, I can't vote for somebody to do it indirectly. It's still theft, whether it's done with my gun or the government's gun. And, yeah, I mean, there isn't a moral argument to be made to capitalism. I think the problem is, though, sometimes people just look at that as selfish, and they say, oh, you want people to be poor and people to die and be sick. And so usually you have to make the economic argument that shows that not only is the morality true, but it actually results in a better living standard for everybody, that this redistributionist mentality, the socialist way, actually diminishes the standard of living of everybody, particularly the people that the policies are aimed to help. So you do want to show how it backfires. But, yeah, I agree that, we want to take a moral high ground, too, that says, look, people have a right to what they produce, that private property is private. And if we think theft is a bad idea, then we shouldn't accept it just because we nationalize it. Robin Hood, the idea, steal from the rich and give to the poor. If it was wrong for Robin Hood, why is it right for King John to do the same thing? I mean, just because people vote for it doesn't make it right. If a few people vote to mug another person, does that mean it's right? There's an old joke about democracy. The definition of democracy is two wolves and a chicken voting over what to have for dinner. And I think the definition of a republic is a well-armed sheep challenging the vote.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'm just really picturing the mass of people that aren't educated in economics, watching, let's say, MSNBC, and watching maybe you debate someone like Ezra Klein or something, where you can clearly articulate why these policies are bad for the economy. And then Ezra Klein can come back with his mountains of graphs and statistics, and then I feel like the viewers just left confused, where the moral argument should really, be very clear, where you would be saying, you cannot steal from another person, that's wrong. And Ezra would have to say, oh, well, I think you can. And to me, that's a more...
And I also, the view of the people who say, look, the government has to steal from the rich to give to the poor. Otherwise, the rich will just let the poor starve to death. I mean, it's such their view of humanity. I mean, I believe that people are basically good and that people will do the right thing with their own money if the government simply leaves it to us. And that there is going to be philanthropy. There is going to be private charity. In fact, there'll be a lot more of it if the government let us keep our money. And the problem is when the government assumes the role of giving up the charity, it's very inefficient. And as a result, I think fewer needy people get money. And, of course, we end up subsidizing need, creating more dependency, whereas private charity would be aimed at creating less dependency. Anyway, we'll be back. Got a lot more coming up. Stick around. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
And this is Peter Schiff here on SchiffRadio.com. A viewer had just sent me an email to let me know that Dan Greenhouse, who has been on this show before, was on CNBC today, also like Alan Greenspan, suggesting that the government use taxpayer money to buy up houses, burn them down, to stimulate the housing market. I mean, how many people are going to buy on to such a stupid idea? We're still building houses. I'm not sure how many hundreds of thousands of homes we're building. But if you really do believe that we should destroy houses, does it really make sense to destroy houses while we're building new ones to replace the ones that we destroy? Wouldn't it be a lot better for the government if you actually believe in this nonsense? How about if the government just pays the home builders to stop building homes? I mean, wouldn't that be a much better way of accomplishing it? That would reduce the number of homes, but we wouldn't have to pay to demolish the ones that already exist. And if we paid home builders not to build homes, I guess the way we pay farmers not to grow food, then maybe some of the resources that they otherwise would have used to build homes that we don't actually need, those resources could be used to do something more productively. After all, why would we destroy homes if we're still building more of them? There is no end to the insanity or the stupidity of people in this country when it comes to basic economics. You know, this plan to destroy houses is just so cockamamie and just so harebrained and crazy, they might actually implement it one day. That's how ridiculous it is. Anyway, let me go back to the phones. Next up is Benjamin calling from Chicago. Benjamin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the information that you give to us. And I had a question. You're always sort of mentioning how things are going to get worse in this country. And I was wondering if you could sort of paint a picture of how bad that is in terms of how bad the economy will get and the reaction in terms of, like, crime and in terms of, like, what you think the government will do, like, 10 years down the line. Is this going to be like another Mexico, or what do you picture this?
Oh, bad can be pretty bad. I mean, we ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to bad. I mean, think about all these Occupy Wall Street protesters, and then, multiply it by 10 and turn it violent. That is what can happen. I mean, when we have the real economic crisis, and there's no doubt in my mind that a real crisis is coming, it's when the dollar is falling. It's when the bond market has burst. In fact, even Alan Greenspan, who was on television on CNBC today, said that he thought eventually we would do something about the deficit, but only after there was a crisis in the bond market. Well, a crisis in the bond market means bond prices collapse, interest rates soar, the dollar collapses, consumer prices soar. So imagine how much more angry and upset and violent Americans are going to be when the bottom really drops out of our economy, when they can't afford to buy things, right? Basic things become extremely expensive, when people are cold, when people are hungry, in addition to being unemployed. I mean, right now, if you're unemployed and you're getting unemployment benefits, you have some money, you can eat, you can heat your house. But imagine when it doesn't matter about your unemployment benefits because you can't afford the cost of living. Imagine when the government is having to slash Social Security benefits or Medicare benefits because interest rates have skyrocketed and the government needs the money to pay interest on the bonds. It doesn't have any money left over to make these payments. So that is when it's really going to hit the fan. And that's when a generation of Americans who have been coddled and led to believe that they're entitled to something, when all of a sudden they don't have it anymore and they feel entitled to it, they're looking for somebody to blame. They're looking for somebody to vilify. And then you get the mob. You get people who are ordinarily rational, law-abiding citizens. They get fired up with the mentality of the mob, and all of a sudden they're bloodthirsty. Somebody's got to pay. We've seen this happen before, and so this is what we are looking at if we allow this situation to continue to proceed on its current course. If our politicians don't have the guts or the knowledge to act to avert this crisis, then the only thing we're going to be doing is acting in the aftermath of the crisis, and it will be bad.
It sounds like the government will be desperate for money at that time. So do you think it's a possibility that they would nationalize people's retirement accounts and give them credit in the Social Security, for that?
Well, who knows? They might nationalize stuff. People say, will they nationalize precious metals, foreign exchange, foreign assets? A lot of people's retirement accounts are going to get wiped out, so there might not be much left to nationalize anyway. But, yeah, could the government force people to buy treasuries? If there was a crisis in the bond market, could the government say, hey, everybody that has an IRA or a pension, you're required to put half that money in treasuries or something? Hey, I wouldn't put it past them. Who knows what they're going to do? But desperate times will, result in desperate measures. And you think about how little respect the government has for the Constitution during normal times. Imagine what happens in a crisis. I mean, the whole thing goes out the window, and it's, hey, the government does whatever it wants. And it's a very, very dangerous combination to have a political crisis, with the type of government and court system that we have, which is basically justifying anything. You remember, I had the guest on the show yesterday, the attorney who was representing the couple that was having the legal battle with the EPA, and basically the EPA's attitude was, hey, the Constitution is too inconvenient. It would be too big an inconvenience to respect the constitutional rights of due process, so we're just going to seize property without any constitutional rights because it's easier for us to do. Well, I mean, so the government has already shown in peaceful times, without a crisis, that they view the Constitution as an inconvenience. Well, imagine how inconvenient the Constitution becomes, when there's riots, and when the dollar's collapsing and the economy is falling apart.
And you really don't think that if the U.S. goes down like that the rest of the world will be pulled down also?
Oh, it depends on what the rest of the world is doing. If the rest of the world is trying to prop us up, then it will be negative. But if the U.S. is collapsing because the world has come to its senses and is allowing the U.S. to fall and allowing the dollar to fall, then no, I think the rest of the world will benefit from the giant sigh of relief that they no longer have to bear that burden. When foreign currencies are rising and when prices are falling in terms of foreign currencies, the rest of the world is going to be better off. If the world no longer has to buy all these U.S. treasuries, think about what else they could do with that money. Instead of squandering it on our debt, it could be used productively in their own country. So, no, I think that, the real crisis in America happens in synchronization with actually a boom in other countries that have been disproportionately suffering the weight of propping up the U.S. economy.
So in the end game, do you think America will go to the level of Mexico, or how low do you think it'll go? Well,
that I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It depends on what the government does. I mean, are we going to follow the Tea Party? Or are we going to follow Occupy Wall Street? I mean, are we going to respond by embracing capitalism and shunning socialism? Or are we going to do the reverse and embrace socialism and shun capitalism? Who is going to get the blame for the problems? Will it be capitalism or will it be government? I don't know yet. I hope it's government, and I hope the solutions involve freedom and returning to constitutional values, and then, our future is bright. If it's the other way, our future is bleak, at least until we change course once again. Hopefully it doesn't have to happen, generations from now in a bloody, violent revolution. I hope that's not the case. But no one knows yet. I mean, the history, the book has not been written yet. It's still open. We are in charge of our destiny, and I'm hoping that we make the right choice as a people, as a nation, for myself, for my son, and for everybody. Anybody, hey, thanks for the call. We will be back. We got plenty more questions coming up. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
Schiff Show.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We are taking your calls live at 855-4-SCHIFF. Next to join the show, John, calling from Colorado Springs, Colorado. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. So, I agree QE is a terrible idea, but if you compare it to just the fractional reserve system, hasn't that pumped more fake money into the system than QE could ever possibly do? So I think current total indebtedness of the nation, private, everything is maybe $36 trillion, and if QE's only pumped in $2 trillion, then how could you really think that it's kind of trivial if you consider if we had a massive credit reduction, credit collapse, QE is not going to cause inflation in and of itself because of a possible credit reduction.
Well, the QE, the act of printing money and buying government debt, that is inflation, right? That's monetizing debt. And yeah, fractional reserve banking expands money supply. The problem is, in a free market on a gold standard, you're still going to have fractional reserve banking. But the amount of the reserves is going to be much higher than it is today because banks would fear a run. Banks would have to hold enough reserves to satisfy potential claims by their depositors. So you have a natural free market regulating the amount of reserves versus the amount of loans, and I think it works. And I think, yes, money supply will expand and contract with the business cycle through a free market fractional reserve system, but it's not going to be anything like the system that is held together today by government guarantees and the Federal Reserve.
So
all of it is inflationary. Everything the federal government, by printing money, they're creating inflation. I mean, that is what they're doing. I mean, the whole economy. I mean, if you take a look at America before the Federal Reserve existed, if you look at the 1800s, prices were going down. I mean, prices were half of what they were in 1900 of what they were in 1800. I mean, that is the natural tendency of prices in a free market with sound money. A gold standard is for prices to come down, and that's a great thing. But ever since we've been on this fiat standard, the job of the central bank is to create inflation so that instead of money gaining value and prices falling, money loses value and prices rise. And the benefit of that is transferred by and large to the government that gets to spend all that purchasing power that everybody else loses.
Right, but like you said, there's such a small amount of fractional backing that fractional that it could collapse. And so it really makes the whole point of QE just trivial, because if we have a massive collapse, we're not going to see inflation. We're going to see deflation.
No, we're going to see inflation because the Fed is going to continue to be there to create money and bail out any of the defaults. Yeah, in a world where we were on a gold standard, yes, we need to have deflation. When you have this big inflationary boom, you need an inflationary bust to resolve the problem. But unfortunately, the government is not going to let that happen. See, the people who are thinking that we're going to have all this deflation, overlooked that. I mean, look at Ben Bernanke's famous speech that he made about the printing press and how the Fed can always stop deflation. It has an invention called the printing press, and they can print as much money as they need in order to stop inflation. I take him at his word. That is what the Federal Reserve is going to do. They are going to print as much money as they need to stop deflation. And that's one war that the Federal Reserve could win. If they want to beat deflation, they can beat it. I mean, it's not a war that we want them to win. It's a war that if they win, we all lose. But, you've got a Fed chairman that thinks that the big problem is potentially prices not rising, or heaven forbid that they actually come down. And so he's going to do whatever he can to prevent that from happening, and he could obviously do it,
So in other words, we haven't seen anything yet. They're going to do what they're doing, but on 10x magnitude.
Yeah, look, there is nothing to stop the Federal Reserve from just, or the government from mailing everybody a check. There's nothing. I mean, they could give people, if they think the problem is spending, that we need more spending, then they could give us money to spend. And they can generate a lot of spending. The problem is it's going to be more spending on the same stuff, because all that's going to happen as a result of a bunch of inflation, we're going to spend more money, but we're not going to have any more stuff to show for it. We're going to be having the same stuff. We're just going to pay a lot more money for the things that we buy, but we're not going to buy more things because the government can create money, but they can't create stuff.
It's just hard to believe someone's that stupid that they would actually do that, but I guess.
Well, look, I mean, you're talking about people that are so stupid they think we should burn down the houses that we've already built.
Wow.
I mean, you can't get much stupider than that.
Right.
I mean, if destroying our assets was going to make us richer, why stop at houses? Let's destroy it all.
Right.
Then we could really stimulate this economy. Anyway, hey, thanks, John, for your call. Next up is Michael calling from Waco, Texas. Michael, you're on.
Hey, yes, Peter Schiff. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yes, well, thanks for listening and finally calling. What's on your mind?
Yes, I was wondering, in the likely event that Ron Paul becomes president, what could he do to stop the deficit spending?
Well, there's a lot that he could do. Number one, he could veto all the spending that reaches his desk. You know, the only way that Congress can spend borrowed money is if the president authorizes it. Now, the only way around that veto would be a 2/3 of both houses. So as long as Ron Paul can convince at least 1/3 of one of those bodies to, uphold his veto, then Ron Paul would have the power as the president to stop deficit spending dead in his tracks. So there is a lot he can do. Obviously, if he cannot convince Congress to go along with him, then it's just going to be, ceremonial, because they will override the veto. But if you have the vetoes, and if Ron Paul uses that bully pulpit to convince America that he's right and this is the medicine we need to swallow, and, obviously if he was the president, he can convene these press conferences, he can have address a joint committee on Congress, and he can lay it out. He doesn't get a big megaphone right now as a long shot supposed candidate in the Republican primary. But if he actually were the commander in chief, a lot of people would listen to what he has to say, and what he has to say is very powerful because, of course, he speaks the truth. He understands economics and he speaks from the heart, and so I think he would be able to convince at least enough people to be able to get enough congressmen to support him. So there is a lot that can be done if Ron Paul were to become president. But as we said earlier, that's probably not what's going to happen. It doesn't mean we can't work for it and hope for it, because if you don't try, if we don't try to elect them, then we're obviously never going to succeed. So we have to at least give it a shot. But recognize that it's probably not the most probable outcome, but it's not completely outside the realm of possibility. I think there is a better probability of Ron Paul being elected president than is generally believed in the country, because I think most people assess that probability at 0, and it's certainly higher than that.
Well, I have a possible answer to that question. Could the president issue an executive order to stop the issuing of Treasury securities?
Well, I don't know. But if we have a deficit, it has to be funded. But if he is vetoing the spending, then the spending can't take place.
Right.
And if he vetoes any increase in the debt ceiling, which he could do, then new debts cannot be taken on. I mean, there's a lot that he could veto, and then force the Congress to have to override that veto. But if the Congress overrode every single veto he had, I don't know what he can accomplish with executive orders. There's probably a lot of agencies that could be pared back or eliminated. There's probably a lot of government employees that he could unilaterally fire. So he could probably substantially pare back the size of government without congressional approval. I mean, I don't know all the various things that the president could do legally. I'm sure Ron Paul would abide by the Constitution. That's the kind of guy he is. So there are a lot of things that presidents do now that are probably not constitutionally authorized. And so even if Ron Paul were in power, if there were things that he thought that he could do that were good, but he believed that they were unconstitutional, I think his principles would prevent him from doing them. So he would have to try to do it in a way that was constitutionally permissible.
Well, that's why I was asking you, do you think it would be constitutional to issue an order to the Treasury to stop issuing Treasury bonds and Treasury securities? And that,
well, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't see how you can stop issuing them if if the spending has been authorized, because I don't know. It says how are they? Otherwise, where would the money come from? I don't know. I don't know if that's something that can be done or not. I hadn't thought about it, but I do know that the spending has to be authorized itself each year. And if the Congress can't spend the money, they can't spend it. And I know that if the debt ceiling is reached and they can't borrow more money, then right there they're not allowed to sell more treasuries, so they have to slash spending. But I don't know if he could just issue an order that says you can't borrow, assuming that Congress can't override that, then they would be forced to cut spending, because that's the only way they could stop the borrowing is to stop the spending that is at the root of it. Of course, there also are maturing treasuries. What would happen to the treasuries that are maturing? Would Congress be able to issue new treasuries to retire the maturing treasuries, or would the order apply to that? I don't know. But, I mean, these are interesting questions, and it'd be nice to get them answered with Ron Paul as the president. But anyway, thank you for your call. Next up is Matt calling from Indianapolis, Indiana. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Colin, I read a news story that the Treasury and some members of Congress are considering doing away with the tax savings on 401k plans, IRAs, things like that. And I was just wondering if you thought that would happen, what the effect would be on the economy, and also would you advise anything like cashing out a 401k or IRA early?
Well, I generally, don't think that it's good to pay taxes today that you could avoid and pay tomorrow. But there is certainly an argument to pay a lower tax today than a much higher tax tomorrow. But the thing is, if you pay the tax today, that's certain. You've already paid it. If you postpone it to another day, even though those rates may be higher today, who knows? There could be future tax cuts. So I would always err on trying to pay taxes later than trying to pay them sooner. So it's hard to tell people to deliberately pay a tax that they could potentially avoid and maybe avoid altogether if there is a more favorable change to the tax laws at some point in the future. But how would the economy be impacted if the government were to make it less tax advantageous for people to make these contributions or save? The result would be less savings, and that would not be a positive thing. But I think a better way for the government to encourage savings is not through these tax incentives and trying to micromanage a behavior through the tax code. Let's just get rid of the taxes that make all these special types of accounts desirable or necessary in the first place. Let's not tax people for earning. Let's not tax people for saving and investing. Let's tax them for consuming. That would be a much better way for the government to generate revenue, and it would do it in the least disruptive, most constitutional manner possible, and it would also allow for a more vibrant economy with faster economic growth and better jobs for people who want them. Anyway, hey, that's it for this segment. Thanks for calling. Stick around. We've got one more segment coming up. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com.
All right, love is kind of crazy with a spooky little girl like you.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You always keep me guessing.
Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And this is Peter. The last episode is here. And before I go back to the phones, I want to play a little sound from the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was on MSNBC yesterday talking about the Occupy Wall Street movement and Steve Jobs and how he believes that Steve Jobs would have been in support of the movement, maybe down there marching with the kids who are occupying Wall Street in towns all around the country. But listen to what the Reverend had to say, cut number 14.
You've led more than a few demonstrations in your day. What's your take on these?
Chris, may I just take a liberty and say that our hearts go out for the Jobs family. I knew Steve over a period of time, and not just a technical computer genius, but also he had an acute sense of social justice and a peace warrior. So he was a well-rounded guy, not just a computer genius we talk about today.
Oh, actually, the sound that I liked out of that clip was actually part of the next one. So play clip number 15.
You think he would have liked these protests?
Well, no doubt about it, because he had this sense, this idea of making computers available for the common people. He was a kind of people's people.
Yeah. He didn't want to make computers available to the common man for free. He wanted to make a profit. He wanted to sell computers to the common man. He wanted to bring down prices so that the common man could afford to buy his products. But he was every much bit motivated by self-interest, by trying to create wealth for himself, for his family. Yes, he enjoyed the creative process and was challenged by it, but he wasn't about, just simply he wasn't a socialist, which is, what the Occupy Wall Street movement is all about. And in fact, Jackson himself kind of gets into one of their issues when he talks about student loans, but somehow he wants to blame Wall Street for this and not government. Government is the reason that students are drowning in debt, not Wall Street. Government is what guaranteed these loans, not the Wall Street banks. Here, cut number 16.
You're looking at the reaction of the abuses of Wall Street power extremes. Student loan debt rather than credit card debt. So many youth cannot afford to go to school, or they cannot stay in school. They graduate a guaranteed debt without a guaranteed job and a low credit score. They're rebelling. The most unforgivable loan is a student loan debt. If we were to forgive student loan debt, it would be a big stimulus to take the economy forward. That is an issue. Second, we bail out the banks, not linked to lending, not the reinvestment. The result is they keep investing, they're not lending, and home market continues to fall.
Yeah, so whose fault is that, Reverend Jackson? Why do students have all this student debt? Wall Street didn't come up with that. It was the U.S. government. The government decided to guarantee the student debt. And where did all that money go that the students borrowed? It went to the universities. It went to the colleges, right? That's where you wanted to go. And now you're blaming the capitalism for what is a failure of government, a failure of government guarantees and government social engineering. Steve Jobs didn't even go to college. He dropped out, I said yesterday, after one semester. I'd like to see somebody say to me, well, gee, it just shows you, imagine how much more he would have accomplished had he stayed in school and graduated. Had he stayed in school and graduated, he might not have accomplished anything. He just might have been another cog in the machine, working in corporate America, especially if he had to take on some student loans, because apparently the reason he dropped out was because of the cost. His parents were struggling to pay the money. Had he just borrowed it instead, he probably would have been too loaded up with debt to have been able to start his computer company, because he would have had to pay back all that debt. But he is right to attack the debt, but not Wall Street, the government. And they're the reason that college is so expensive. And he says, well, let's forgive the student debt. That's going to be stimulative. Well, what about the cost of forgiving it? Who's going to pay for that? And if forgiving debt is stimulative, why stop at student debt, right? Just forgive it all. The guy is clueless. Anyway, I'm going to see if I can take one last call. Chris, New Jersey, you're on.
Hey, Peter. I just wanted to get a comment from you about a situation. I'm 25 years old. Me and my girlfriend are buying a house right now, not as investors, but a place to start a life. And we both have jobs, and I have school debt. She has very little debt. Do you think it's a good idea with rates so low right now? Do you think inflation will benefit us if we plan on staying in the house in 30 years?
I don't know. I mean, you're talking about your girlfriend. You guys aren't even committed enough to get married, yet you want to buy a house together. I wouldn't go there. I mean, I think if you got a girlfriend, rent. Because the relationship could end. The last thing you want is to be stuck with a house that neither one of you can afford on your own. If you guys are really sure about this relationship and you want to get married and you think it's gonna be permanent, that might be a different story. But I think a lot of these couples that decide to buy a house, yet they're not even married. They don't even have. I'm assuming you're not having kids because you're not married. I don't know why you need a house. There are plenty of places that you can rent. That's what I would do.
Well, rent is just as expensive.
But why do you want to commit to a house when you can't even commit to the woman that you're sharing it with? You don't know what life is going to bring you, how things are going to change. It's so much easier if you rent a place, you can get out of it. As soon as the lease is up, you're out of there. It's a lot more difficult when you own a house. What if you guys break up? What are you going to do with a house?
Well, I am confident in our relationship, and I don't see that as the issue. I was talking about.
Well, get married first. Then ask me the question. I don't know. I just think that people go and getting houses with friends, with and even girlfriends. I mean, at least if it's a good buddy you've had for a long time and your roommates, I mean, that might be more lasting. But relationships come and go. You're confident today, and things can change. I mean, how old are you?
I'm 25.
25. Nah, the last thing you should be thinking about is buying a house. I mean, you're 25. Come on. Anyway, hey, that's it for the show today. Everybody, again, have a great Yom Kippur. For those of you who celebrate it, have an easy fast. And I will be back on Monday with another full week of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard